John in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Boy, I'll bet there is a big river with a grand set of rapids. Anyway, he says, I recently viewed your video from a couple of years back, about how the soundstage can exceed the speaker's width. It made me wonder which components of a system comprised of separates would have the biggest impact on creating a great soundstage, assuming the speakers in the system were capable as well as the room's acoustics were adequate. Yeah, well, first off, that's a pretty big assumption. Most speakers are quasi-adequate. Most rooms are okay, and most setups are lousy. I would say, the majority of setups that I have seen really, just a simple Saturday afternoon of setting up the system would benefit 70-80% of every high-end audio system out there. Dealers do their best. They're not all that great. Consumers, I don't know, I could go on. I've been to so many systems over so many years. I mean, it's one of the reasons I wrote the books. And yes, I'm going to give you a quick plug, and then we'll get on to the subject here. So I did write a book called The Audiophile's Guide, The Loudspeaker. I spoke about it last time. A lot of you went to Amazon to look for it, and it wasn't there. Hey! Well, my editor took a long time to get through it, but it's there now, I promise you. So it's just type in The Audiophile's Guide, The Loudspeaker, and I can't think of anything better to get that wide sound stage, that depth, all of that, step-by-step instructions. And there's an SACD you'll have to buy along with it and the two together, go to track 1, do this, go to track 2, do that, then go back. You know, I guarantee you take that set of instructions and that SACD, and that's how you'll make magic, and that's how you'll get the soundstage to exceed the extremes of the speaker. Now, let me also suggest, and then I'll get to more specific on the question, that in the book we talk about two very different styles of speaker setup. So there's the style that a few manufacturers of speakers propose, which I call the long wall setup, and that is where the speakers are you see this at shows a lot. The speakers are very far apart, they're angled in so that they're hitting right towards your ears, and there's a huge space in between where you get a phenomenal soundstage. The first time I ever heard it, Dave Wilson of Wilson Audio had set up a pair of speakers at a show, and you know, it shows we have these long rows of maybe 20 seats, right? So you got to have a fairly big soundstage, a fairly large sweet spot if you're going to be successful at a show, right? So his method was to pull them out from the wall, spread them far apart, and tow them in, and then he has a lot of other tricks that we go through in the book, and that's one way of doing it. But the soundstage does not extend beyond the edges of the speaker in that scenario. To get that, you have to have a specific kind of setup that we talk about in the short wall, where the speakers are kind of facing straight at you and a little bit towed in. But anyway, you can find all that out in the Audiophile's Guide. Okay. Equipment. Well, all the equipment matters, but I would have to say, of all the equipment in my experience, that not only gives us that freedom of sound escaping the speakers themselves, because one of the things that electronics do and poor speaker setup does is traps the sound in the speakers themselves. So if you go home today, or you're already home, and you fire up your system and you listen to it, and if some of the sound is still trapped in the speakers or coming from the speakers, and maybe only the center image is coming out of the speakers and the left and right are kind of trapped, you got a setup problem, and you may have an electronic problem. And that is mostly found in either the source or the preamp. So the farther down the signal chain, the more it tends to do it. But Sometimes right in the middle is important as well. Power amps matter, but that preamplifier, or however you're controlling the volume, that control piece really has a lot to do with separation of instruments and players within the soundstage, divorcing it from the speaker, and extending it then to the outer edges. And that's the piece I would focus on. But all that said, that's the last thing I would do until you have properly set up those speakers, because you might be able to save a lot of money. I mean, look, I want to sell you all kinds of stereo equipment. That's what we do, right? But on the other hand, you got to start out with your speakers set up properly, and you will, in a Saturday afternoon, and drop what, I don't know, $30 for the book and $30 for the SACD. Guaranteed that'll be one of the biggest changes you've ever had. So, all right. Thanks. I'll talk to you later. Bye.